Hey, howdy. I'm Darlene Marshall, host of the Better Than Fine podcast. And on this week's episode of the show, we're doing an update on ultra processed foods. You've probably heard those words around out there, but there's new evidence coming out about just how damaging they are to our body and how we got here. And I want to tell you the story of how our food system brought us to this place, what scientists are currently saying about the ultra processed foods and some of the criticisms out there I want to respond to. I get real heated on this one because I feel really strongly that we need to talk about it. So let's get to it. Like, follow, subscribe, share. You know what to do. Time for the episode. Well, hello there, listeners, and welcome to this week's episode of the Better Than Fine podcast. I'm your host, wellness coach, and well-being educator, Darlene Marshall. And Happy New Year! Happy 2026! I know, because I know our recording schedule, that you're going to hear this in a couple of weeks, but it's my first one back after like a big, wild holiday adventure, and I'm really stoked to be kicking it back in 2026 and excited to start a new year. We have some great stuff planned to share with you this year, and I can't wait. So let's get to it. One of the things that I think is really cool about being an adult in the digital age is just how fast things change and how quickly information is dispersed. And for you youngins that grew up like this, let me tell you a little bit as an elder millennial, it was not always this way. And I can remember a time where when we got new information in this industry, it really slowly trickled out and dissipated. And you'd have like debate within your own gym about, well, I heard this and I heard that. And we really didn't have the ability to just go look it up. We kind of had to like find textbooks and dig for information and like sort it all out. But it is really cool now to be at a time where any of us can go dive in and dig around in the available information and share these ideas. And back in 2024, we did a series of episodes about the current evidence then on ultra processed foods to help you, our dear listeners, better understand what the current discourse was about what we were eating and how it affected us and the scientific understanding at that time. And it's only been 2 years. And in that 2 years, a lot of stuff has changed, kind of for all of us, let's be honest. For one, science is a little bit under attack. And I think that is partly because of the way that health reporting and health information influencing shape public perception. Because there seems to be this idea that science should be definite and finite. And that's really just not how science works. Science is a method, a framework for how we examine material reality to figure out what is real. And as we get more information, we come up with new and better questions that then let us re-examine the evidence we have to form a new and improved understanding. So the understanding should evolve as we get new information. And I think the best scientists are the ones who are able to look back, tell the story of the information, and then decide what that new information means now. And that's a bit about what this episode is going to be today. So there's no doubt that over the last 50 years, we have seen a big rise in health problems that have come to be known as Western lifestyle diseases. For most of my life, there have been people out there trying to figure out what causes Western lifestyle diseases. And then there's also been other people whose livelihoods and profit margins, and some might even argue way of life, has been threatened by the potential that it might be them. And so they're really invested in using political forces like lobbying and marketing to shift public perception and go, hey, it is not us. And if you want a similar example to this, it's the tobacco industry, when people started pointing out like, hey, maybe tobacco causes cancer. And they're like, no, it can't be us. And they invested a lot of money in convincing the public it couldn't be true. But back to ultra processed foods. 2 years ago, we did a series that was based in a meta-analysis that in the time seemed so radical. And at the time, most people didn't even know the phrase ultra-processed foods. So the first episode was just explaining what that actually meant. And then this meta-analysis that it was showing that those people who eat a higher percentage of industrial ingredients, what's known as ultra-processed foods in their diet, had worse health outcomes. And a meta-analysis is when you look at a whole bunch of different studies all together and go, okay, what do they all say? And that study seemed mind-bending at the time. And now kind of everybody knows this, right? There are criticisms of that study and the way that it is done that have crept out into the world since. And we're going to talk about them a little bit in this episode. But at that time, listeners of the show, clients, friends, I was doing a ton of content because I think it's really important that people know this. And they reached back out to me and they said, well, then what should I eat? And it was really difficult to give them full guidance because really we didn't know. We didn't know which ingredients were the problem. So we'll be doing some updates about that in this episode as well. And I want to say here at the top that if you have questions after this episode, at the end of every episode, I give my email, I give my DMs, I give you exactly how to reach me. If at any point in this episode you have questions, please reach out, because one of the cool things that happened last time was we got to have a conversation about it. And I'm going to give you some updates on those conversations as well. Here in the United States, where I live, it is estimated that around 70% of the food in our grocery stores are classified as ultra-processed foods. Now, I live pretty rural. I live in a village of 400 people way out in the mountains. It's probably worse where I am. It's probably more than 70%. The kicker on this evidence, I said this a moment ago, I'm going to say it a couple of times so that it really sinks in your brain container, because one of the things I realized while I was prepping for this episode is my own family still doesn't get this because we talked about it a bunch. The higher percentage of your total calories that are ultra processed foods, the worse your health outcomes are in this bucket that we call Western lifestyle diseases. So that's metabolic disease, heart disease, IBS, higher rates of cancer. We're going to talk a bunch about what the current evidence update is to that as well. But for most of my life, that stuff has been blamed on individual choices. Think about it. That message that we all have, that if people are sick, if people are fat and slow and they don't feel good and they have high blood pressure and like all the stuff, it's that they just need to have more willpower and exercise more. But the longer I do this work, the more that I am able to see that the systems of the way that we have been set up to live our lives set people up for failure. These foods, these ultra-processed foods, have been literally designed to have low nutritional value, low satisfaction. So you eat a bunch, you don't get much nutrition, and you don't feel satisfied. And they have high taste and high palatability. So they taste good, they feel good in your mouth, they have that good crunch you love. They are designed so that you will over-consume them. Now, there's some technical language here. The first word I want to put in your head is hyperpalatability. That is where food designers will do group testing. Okay, does this formulation versus this formulation, we got two groups in a room. We're going to count the chips while these people fill out a survey about their television to see which room eats more chips. Oh, it's room B. That's the formulation we're going to go with because those people couldn't stop eating. That's hyperpalatability. The second word I want to put in your head is super normal stimulus. This one isn't just about food. It's also about your phone. It's about Netflix. It's about video games. But super normal stimulus is when you have some kind of stimulus to your brain and your nervous system that doesn't occur out in the natural world. So when it comes to food, it's that taste or the crunch or the mouthfeel or the color, that it doesn't happen naturally. So you get more subconscious pleasure than you would from a natural food. And then you crave it more and you don't want the natural foods. For some people, hyperpalatability and supernormal stimulus, they are extremely sensitive to it, especially in combination. And then they can't stop and it functions like a drug addiction. That's real. That's not willpower. That is the world being designed in a way to exploit our natural instincts. So on today's show, I want to share with you a series of new studies, of papers and meta-analyses that came out right at the tail end of 2025. We're talking a month ago and in the subsequent weeks, that are helping us to evolve our understanding of what is actually going on and to respond to the most common criticisms that I have heard, including from my favorite podcast, did an episode about this that was so wrong. And I want to give you the information about why I think they're so wrong and how dangerous it is. Now, today's show, you don't have to have listened to those episodes, but if you listen to this and you're curious and you want more information, last week's encore episode was the Nova Food Scale episode that dives really deep into what these words mean. Now, you don't have to listen to that, but before we dive in, we're going to do a quick sidebar about what that stuff means. So the studies on food and health rely on this Nova Food Scale. Go listen to last week's episode if you want to nerd out about it. Now, the short version, for those who don't, 4 categories: whole, culinary, processed, ultra-processed. So whole is a 1. 1 is whole, and that's like I go out of my yard to pick an apple off my tree, I eat it. It's a whole food. A 2 is what you do in like home cooking. So you peel the apple. Now it doesn't have all of its original fiber and cellulose, but you're still eating an apple. That's a 2. It's a culinary ingredient. 3 is maybe I slice the apples up and I use a canner. So technically that's processed. Or maybe I mix it with some sugar and like make a little dessert and bake it. Right? Those are technically processing. It is a processed food, but it's made of all the whole real ingredients, like butter. Butter is a processed food because it churned it, but it's still butter. Cheese, naturally occurring cheeses, not that, plastic cheese, which is what I call American cheese, is plastic cheese. So 3 is it's made of real stuff. It is technically processed. Maybe you baked it, maybe you blended it or whatever it is, but it's still real. But what we're going to talk about today, when we say ultra-processed foods, we are talking about industrial food ingredients. A 4 is industrial ingredients that are used to create flavor, texture, preserve it, keep it from splitting, keep it whole, right? Those are ultra-processed foods. And when we're talking about ultra-processed foods, we're talking about these industrial ingredients. One of the big criticisms of this work is that a 4 is too broad of a category. That's too many things. Now, I don't disagree with the idea that we need some subcategories in category 4 in ultra-processed foods. But the way science works is we build a body of evidence, and we needed a way to talk about it where we could parse out, like, I baked this in my oven with real ingredients and ultra-processed foods, right? We needed a way to separate those two. And we didn't need to know all of the sub-ingredients in a cigarette to know that smoking was hurting us, right? Like, I didn't need to know if it was the formaldehyde in the filter or if it was just smoking a burning thing to know that smoking was bad for me. Many people are very surprised to find out that in my 20s, I smoked. Back when I was an actor, I was a smoker, I was a drinker, and I ate almost all ultra-processed foods until I got really sick. And when I dove in a bit deeper about what it was doing to my body, I didn't need to know the mechanism of action. I knew it was hurting me. Still quit. We know that 4 is a broad category. We don't know all of the nuances yet about what is hurting people, but what I hope to convince you today is that we have more and more evidence showing us that it is hurting people. So it's not an unreasonable criticism. And I'd like to take this moment to give our little show here a pat on the back, because when I read this information the first time 2 years ago, and we did this series of episodes, a few of you reached out since then to share that in the 2 years since you learned about this, and it changed your relationship to how you thought about your food, it gave you a bunch of motivation to change your nutrition. And we've had a couple of people from those episodes make great improvements to their health. So kudos to you for using this information for yourselves. And not just from this show, but generally in my life, I have seen incredible changes that have impacted people's health just from shifting and decreasing their ultra processed food intake. So it's not nonsense. Now let's get to these studies. The first study that we're going to look at is from December 6th of 2025. So 1 month ago from when I am recording this, and also it happened to be my birthday. So happy birthday to me from the Lancet. Thank you so much. It was called Ultra Processed Foods and Human Health, the main thesis and the evidence. It had a total of 20 authors, so I'll spare you reading all of them. And it was published in the Lancet as the first of a 3-part series. That paper really focused on this question of like, well, what's the real problem? What's actually going on when we talk about processed foods? We'd strip away all of the influencer stuff. What does the evidence really say? And the paper starts with framing, why do we have an industrial food system at all? And one of the big arguments out there, and I said this on the show too, is that shelf stability, convenience, it allowed the people who previously were responsible for obtaining and cooking all the food in a home to get out in the world and have some liberation. Okay, I don't disagree with that. But here's first quote. We're going to have a bunch of quotes coming up. If you like the quotes, here we go. Quote, industrial food processing has become increasingly aimed at creating substitutes for whole foods and their preparation as dishes and meals. End quote. That's basically saying that we've gone past the point where it was about preservation and access and toward a place where it is replacing whole foods. And in some of the other papers, they also talk about the way that is replacing traditional foods and traditional food cultures. And we're going to get to why that is also relevant in this conversation in just a second. And then it immediately went on to say something else, quote, in pursuit of greater profits, especially by transnational corporations, new processing technologies emerged. Unlike long-established methods, such as drying, chilling, freezing, pasteurization, fermentation, baking, salting, sugaring, bottling, canning, which largely preserve the natural structure of foods and enhance their durability, palatability, and culinary versatility, these new technologies disrupt food matrices, chemically modifying food components and combined them with additives to produce ready-to-consume, long-lasting, and highly palatable products. End quote. The authors of this study are overtly saying the quiet part out loud. I'm going to circle you back to the first part of that big block of quote, in pursuit of greater profits. The authors of this paper are overtly starting with that it is designed, these new food processing techniques. Now, mind you, some of these techniques, drying, chilling, pasteurization, fermentation, baking, salt, and sugaring, some of those techniques are millennia old. Drying food to preserve it is millennia old. The authors are saying that these new techniques were not about shelf stability or convenience. They're actually about driving overconsumption at the cost of nutrition and nourishment. Next quote. Meta-analyses of prospective studies show associations between the ultra-processed dietary pattern and an increased risk of overweight or obesity, abdominal obesity, type 2 diabetes, hypertension, dyslipidemia, cardiovascular disease and mortality, coronary heart disease or mortality, cerebrovascular disease or mortality, chronic kidney disease, Crohn's disease, depression, and all-cause mortality. End quote. Let me break some of these down for you. So, eating a lot of ultra-processed foods in your diet, yeah, it makes you fat, but specifically abdominal obesity, that is the accumulation of fat around the organs in your torso, which we know the pressure of that damages all the organs in your torso. We need those. Hypertension is high blood pressure. Dyslipidemia is abnormal fats in the blood. So there's like too much fat in your blood. Cardiovascular disease and mortality. So it's dying from cardiovascular disease. Coronary disease, dying from coronary disease. Cerebrovascular disease. That's the blood that goes to your brain. We need that too. Kidney disease. But one of the most impactful and interesting studies to me, as I spent the last month diving into all of this stuff, was on ultra-processed food consumption and depression That study is called Association Between Ultra-Processed Food Consumption and Risk of Developing Depression in Adults, a Systematic Review. Reminder that a systematic review is when we look at all the papers on a particular topic and draw conclusions, but we don't have a big enough pool to do a meta-analysis, right? We need more papers for meta-analysis. This one is by Saba Karim, Aliyah Shah Alam, and Aqsad Syed. 9 studies, over 79,000 participants. Individuals with the highest ultra-processed food intake had between 20 and 50% higher risk of depressive symptoms. Now, some might say that if you're depressed, you might have more ultra-processed foods. They control for that. And the theories from this paper is that high ultra-processed food consumption causes gut issues, neuroinflammation, you know what those words mean, and disrupted neurotransmitter function. So if you think about, if you're a regular listener to the show, you know an awful lot about emotion science because we talk about it all the time. Neurotransmitters help us to feel things. And if I have disrupted neurotransmitter function and inflammation in my nervous system, then positive experiences become a thought experiment, not something I feel. And that's part of depression. I would like to pull back a little bit and just say that I think in the fitness and wellness space, we have spent so long just talking about weight that we have missed the forest through the trees. Because just like fitness and movement, which we talk about on this show all the time, the industry has made so much of it about how we look that people have lost the connection between the benefits of not just how we feel physically, but how we feel emotionally. And all of that that matters for longevity, well-being, productivity, everything we care about that has nothing to do with how we look. So anyway, back to that study, because we're not done, kids. Ultra-processed foods gives us all these negative health outcomes. Okay. But then they go on to say that food manufacturers and distributors, in the name of profits, are not only creating these foods, but they're also disrupting traditional food systems so that people become more and more reliant on ultra-processed foods. And lest you think that reading the ingredient label is going to be enough, and you just choose the words that you pronounce, it goes deeper than that. And I want to remind you, this is not my opinion. This is published in the Lancet, which is one of the world's most significant major scientific journals. This is not me being a crazy girl. This is what the science says. They have evidence to back up these assertions. If you want to dive deeper, go read the paper. It was just so much to try to put in one episode. It's not just the food ingredients. It is the chemicals that they put on the inside of the package to keep the food from sticking. Now I'm talking not just plastic bags, I'm talking cans, I'm talking frozen food. And it's the stuff mixed in to keep it from caking or splitting or combining in ways they didn't want. And it's the formulations of the ingredients that haven't even been tested yet for safety because it's not required to be by our governments. Quote, plausible mechanisms for harm include nutrient imbalances, overeating, reduced consumption of health protective phytochemicals, toxic contaminants from processing or packaging, harmful additives and mixtures of additives and subsequent inflammation, dysglycemia, dyslipidemia, microbiome dysbiosis, and renal or liver dysfunction. End quote. Yeah, it's not just the food. It's the stuff around the food. It's the stuff coated on the food. It's the packaging. We haven't even talked about plastic contaminants. So when we eat ultra-processed foods, we're missing out on essential nutrients. We're eating more than we need. We're eating packaging contaminants. We're eating additives that hurt the gut, the nervous system, the endocrine system, which the endocrine system is hormones. The nervous system is the control computer. That hurts everything else. And altogether, this causes irregular blood sugar, irregular fat distribution, fat in your blood, hormone disruption. It kills the gut microbiome. It damages the liver and the kidneys. Good times. Great classic hits. That's just the first paper. So then they go on to wrap that first study by saying, essentially, we don't understand all of it and we don't understand every mechanism of action, but we have enough to know that it's really bad. And there's major capitalist incentive to continue to make it worse. And we need to do something before the public health crisis continues to spread, because now it's a global problem. We exported it. That's just the first paper. The second paper in the series has 12 authors, and it's called Policies to Halt and Reverse the Rise of Ultra-Processed Food Production, Marketing, and Consumption. And I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this one for a couple of reasons. The first one is scientists, in my opinion, are not great at public policy. And if we look at the last 60 years of public health nutrition policy in America, we have a lot of evidence to why they're not great at setting that policy, communicating that policy, and getting people to buy into it. We're also in a moment that public health policy in many large developed countries, frankly, sucks. And it has become so highly politicized that we're not getting anywhere. And the other reason is, I think for you as my listeners, it's very unlikely that you personally are going to be able to do a whole lot about any of it. And so I don't want to spend a whole bunch of time on it, but I'll point at that old food pyramid from the 80s and 90s, the one I was raised on, and probably many of us were raised on, if those of us who are a certain age. That food pyramid was really dumb. And despite the last 20 years of good public health policy to try to improve nutrition in America and get away from the food pyramid, the My Plate, less than 10% of people actually get anywhere near the government food health regulations, because the marketing and the hyperpalatability and the suprarrenal stimulus is so much more powerful than like what we're taught in kindergarten. And now we're in a place where almost everyone has to rely on this new food system. And that food system is highly incentivized to keep us really stuck on cheap, fast, nutrient-poor, additive-laden foodstuffs. So while I do think policy needs to catch up, most people aren't getting their food information from governments and policy. They're getting it from marketing and social media, which is extremely powerful. Regulating it isn't going to come anytime soon. And unfortunately, that means that it's up to each of us individually, in our families, in our communities, to have good information, to make good decisions, given whatever resources that we do have. And if any of you listening happened to be in a position where you could influence public policy, the relevant paper is called Policies to Halt and Reverse the Rise of Ultra-Processed Food Production, Marketing, and Consumption. I would love it if any of you were in that position and let us know that you did something. So the third paper then builds on that. There's 20 authors. It's called Towards Unified Global Action on Ultra-Processed Foods, Understanding Commercial Determinants, Countering Corporate Power, and Mobilizing a Public Health Response. And that paper opens by comparing industrial food to big tobacco. And not only in the health outcome stuff, but in the way that they're openly manipulating public health perception through marketing and lobbying and other means. Quote, "We show that the ultra-processed food industry is the key driver of the problem, as its leading corporations and codependent actors have expanded and restructured food systems almost everywhere in favor of ultra-processed diets. The higher profitability of ultra-processed foods compared with other types of food fuels this growth by financially incentivizing the ultra-processed business model over alternatives and generating resources for continued expansion." End quote. Now, I've seen some critics, including my very favorite podcast, did an episode basically about how the Nova food scale is dumb and the ultra-processed food conversation is dumb, and saying like, God, do what you want, food sovereignty, eat your junk food if you want. And I believe that if you care about people and well-being, which you listen to this show, so I'm going to guess that you care about people and well-being, that's not going to cut it in face of significant scientific evidence. And yes, there are criticisms. I already talked about why I think they're valid, but the evidence on the health outcomes is unequivocal. And this third paper is about how it's being intentionally driven by a corporate machine. Quote, the main barrier to advancing policy responses is the industry's corporate political activities, coordinated transnationally through a global network of front groups, multi-stakeholder initiatives, and research partners. Parking myself for a second. Research partners means they're paying people to do counter research. Getting back to the quote, to counter opposition and block regulation. These activities include direct lobbying, infiltrating government agencies and litigation, promoting corporate-friendly governance models, forms of regulation in civil societies, and framing debate, generating favorable evidence, and manufacturing scientific doubt. End quote. This is the one that really got to me, because some of the evidence that this paper shows was generated by the counter program is what these very well-meaning content creators were relying on and citing. And they have a huge following and footprint, and I respect them so much. And even they got sucked into it. The bad guys are winning by duping the good guys, and it made me so mad. I really hope they're going to do another episode where they revisit this based off of the evidence from the Lancet. Because honestly, at this point, I think it's really dangerous to people's health. And I was really disappointed. And I really look up to them as content creators that I strive to be like. So crossing my fingers. Yeah, at the end of all of this, I think we're then left with the question of like, well, what do we do with it? Because we're all subject to this system. I live in upstate New York. It's January. I've got probably another 6 months before I can grow my own broccoli. So if I go to the store, I've either got to pay out the eyeballs for fresh broccoli that isn't very fresh, it doesn't taste good, or I have to buy frozen and it comes in a plastic package, right? Like that's my choice. And I'm lucky. I can afford the expensive one. I can afford to drive to the fancy grocery store. And a lot of people can't. I think if you're a fitness or a well-being professional, we need to recognize that there are massive, powerful corporate interests that are counter to individual empowerment and sovereignty. And when we perpetuate a narrative that it's a personal failing, we feed that machine. And personally, so if your goal, personally or professionally, is to promote well-being, I think you have to care about this, and we have to be honest with ourselves about the system we find ourselves in, especially with the links not only to physical health outcomes, but to mental health and well-being outcomes as well. And to that, we have to also recognize how expensive good food has become and how addictive and damaging the junk is. It is not a question of personal willpower. We need to change the story because we are the professionals in the space. And we have to care. Otherwise, what are we doing? And then, of course, if you have the means and the time, I just noted this for myself, but if you have the means and the time, local farmers markets, buy local. In my case, I live in a place I can buy directly from the farmers, and maybe you can too. If you're not familiar with the concept of community-supported agriculture, often called a CSA, look and see if there's one in your area. You build a direct relationship with the farmers, and you're supporting your local economy, and you're supporting your local agriculture. And cook at home. I will admit, most of my life, I've been a terrible cook. I am not that good at it. And as somebody in the fitness industry, you'd think I would be. Nope. But in the realization of all of this, as I've been diving deeper into the evidence, I've also recognized that maybe it's time for me to upskill and put my big girl pants on. So I have a few people in my life teaching me how to cook right now because I want to be better at it and I want to grow and I don't want to keep feeding the same problem in the way that I was. So you can. Let's use our own buying power and resourcefulness to be part of disrupting the corporate food system that's making all of us sick. And what's more punk rock than that? All right, we're going to leave it there. I'd love to hear your feedback on this and every episode of this show, so you can email me. It's info@darlene.coach. You can find me on Instagram. It's also darlene.coach, and you can send me a DM. I check them all the time. I'm also on LinkedIn. If you're a fan of the show, please subscribe. Leave us a review, because sharing is caring. And thank you to everybody who's already been writing about the show. Share about it. Tag us. Let us know. Thank you so much. Take good care of yourselves. Happy New Year, everybody, and be well.